Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering thematic walking tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director of the company, and I really appreciate you joining us for this episode. Today's guest, David Ridgen, has become something of a podcast legend. His show, Someone Knows Something, released through the CBC, has become one of the most listened to podcasts in the world. In the first season, he set out to solve the 1972 disappearance of a 5-year-old Adrian McNaughton in Eastern Ontario. Despite an extensive search for him at the time, no sign was ever found. Ridgen speaks to family, friends, and other members of the community, discovering new leads and evidence, trying to put the ghosts of the past to rest. What the show does really well is balance the true crime or mystery side, the idea that, leads can be discovered, clues can be found, and together, perhaps we can unravel this mystery and get to a conclusion, alongside a very poetic side, an intimate side, as we get to know some of the victims around these disappearances and begin to maybe not understand, but see the world a little bit through their eyes. In Season 2, David Ridgen set his sights on a new mystery involving the disappearance of a woman just days after being proposed to on live television. Here's a little trailer for Season 2.
Police in Hamilton Wentworth need your assistance in locating a missing person.
Well, it sounds like there's somebody in there, but they're not answering the door.
She must have seen something, because why would she do this?
So this is the stairway that leads to the back door that exits close to the parking lot.
It wasn't a regular missing person case. There was some concern for her safety at that point.
He was agitated. I questioned him. I said, well, I'm going to phone the police. You wouldn't believe it, my heart was just pounding.
Someone Knows Something. The acclaimed podcast series returns with Season 2.
There was officers on the scene, and it was Harab and I who opened the door to the garage.
I seriously had no concern for jail time or anything of that nature. I would have took care of them.
We really did hang around a rough crowd.
How do I know? She told me, and I believed her. I had no reason not to believe her.
Can you confirm whether they were bloodstains or not?
I can't get into that. I know I'm talking in riddles.
I know, it's okay. I'll try to unravel them.
Someone Knows Something with David Ridgen.
For the past year, I've been investigating a new cold case in one of Canada's toughest towns.
She didn't deserve this. She's on my mind all the time.
Season 2 of Someone Knows Something. Go to cbc.ca/SKS.
Before we get to my interview with David Ridgen, I quickly wanted to follow up on our last episode about the fate of the Kingston Penitentiary. That was episode 19. The response to the show was extremely strong, and a few days after its release, our founder and CEO, Glenn Shackleton, as you can hear in episode 1, had a letter published in the Kingston Whig Standard, a letter to the editor. In it, he made a very strong case why the long-term tourism and historical value of the penitentiary site may be being undervalued in the consultation process. If you have not seen that letter and are interested, you can jump onto our website, hauntedwalk.com/news, and the post about it is there. A big thank you, as I know many of you also wrote in to the consultants and to the mayor before that deadline in early March. Thank you for that, and we'll keep you up to date as this process moves forward as to what's going on. And I thank everyone, because I do think we made quite a big impact. I also wanted to mention now that as we move into the spring, early April, our schedule becomes much more frequent with tours going sometimes 7 days a week in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. Tour information can be found on our website, hauntedwalk.com. And we have a number of big things that I would like to tell you about, exciting things for the year to come. We're working very hard on, but it's not quite time for that yet. But please make sure you follow us on our social channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat at Haunted Walk. And there's some really big announcements coming soon, and we can't wait to share those. Joining us now from a studio at the CBC in Toronto is David Ridgen. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, your podcast, Someone Knows Something, is one of the top-rated and most downloaded shows on iTunes. Have you been surprised at how big of a hit the show has become and just how people have responded to it?
Well, starting out developing the project, I knew, the true crime space is popular. Obviously, the success of Serial and other true crime-esque type storytelling has been very popular recently. So I knew, we would gain some traction, but it has been astronomically popular throughout the world, actually. We're number one in Norway for a while, number one in Denmark. We were the number one English podcast of all podcasts in those countries, not just true crime podcasts or news podcasts. So it's been, and I'm getting response from not only Hamilton, but people in Australia are talking to me about the case, and people in the States, and people from Argentina, and places you'd never suspect would even have English listeners to some extent. But it's been phenomenally popular, and I think it's only going to be increasingly so in the crime space with social media and the way podcasts work.
I assume we're talking about tens of millions of downloads here. What do you think it is about the genre, or maybe your show in particular, that people have really embraced?
So just to be clear, SKS has had over 18 million downloads since since we started. And that's pretty spectacular for a Canadian podcast. In fact, I would say that it's probably the most popular Canadian podcast ever. We know numbers for CBC's podcasts, and it by far is doing better than all the CBC podcasts. But we don't have other people's numbers, obviously, because we don't have access to that. But looking at the data that we're able to say with some confidence that SKS is the most popular podcast in Canadian history so far. The genre true crime is a popular phenomenon, and I think it's been popular since the beginning of time, actually. To some extent, I think humans like to solve puzzles. They like to figure out why things happen. We like to rubberneck. We like to look at accidents. We like to look at the misfortunes of others and imagine our own lives carrying on in a sort of relatively even fashion. But I think it's really just the monkey puzzle. People like to solve these things themselves and imagine themselves in those kinds of situations. And there's something about the grief of others that I think attracts audiences to become passionate about these cases. And I remember, again, I've told this story before, but looking at on my mother's bedside table, she had the Torso book. It's called Torso, about the murder of Evelyn Dick's husband in Hamilton. And inside that book, which the case happened in the 40s, inside the book are these black and white pictures of the torso and this body basically inside I think linens or sort of long underwear that he was thrown onto Hamilton Mountain with, and just been terrified to look, but also couldn't not look kind of thing as a kid. And that book scared me. But it was attractive to me in some ways, So I, from an early time, and that was a book that I don't know. I think that book came out in the 50s or 60s, because I was looking at this in the 70s. So I think true crime's been around for a while. Social media, I think, helps to generate another kind of interest because of the participation of an audience. Audiences can feel like they actually are embedded in a case. They can feel that they're participating. We can reach people that actually do know something in ways that television programs that are on the air for like an hour and gone forever. I guess you could find them on YouTube, but it's just a way to engage with an audience in a different way. And podcasts, in general, the relationship an audience has with a podcaster, the host, my voice, me as a person is much different than any other media. And I think that true crime can really energize people to take part in the investigation, both people that know something and people that don't know anything about the case.
In addition to your podcasting exploits, you also have a background in filmmaking.
So, storytelling has always been in the genes, I guess. I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, which is a storytelling avenue. And started off early when I was in grade 7. I made a story about an animated film about evolution, which was completely out of focus. But I continued on. I actually wanted to be a special effects person in Hollywood, working on the film like Alien or something like that. And kind of progressed into the documentary sphere once I realized that it had a lot more opportunity for actually making something useful happen in the world. And generally proceeded from there. I worked at TV Ontario for a while. I've worked at CBC for a long time as a staffer. Then I left and made documentaries on my own in the true crime space, and also made some dramatic movies. I've made a feature film, some documentary shorts, and I've continued with the true crime now as well since my success in Mississippi, which started about 2004. I did the case of 2 African Americans who had been killed by the Klan, and over a number of years successfully worked on that film and helped to push for the prosecution of James Ford Seal, who was prosecuted as a result of the investigation in a federal U.S. court and went to jail for the murders of the 2 men and died in jail. So after that, the true crime bug stuck, and I kind of continued on that plane for a while. And came back to CBC to develop SKS at CBC's request. And here we are.
And when making a film or a podcast, how do you decide which mysteries to pursue? What are the considerations kind of in your mind when looking at, I'm sure you get a variety of different cases in front of you?
Yeah, we've gotten, since SKS has started, we've gotten, I think, over 150 viable, interesting, tragically horrifying cases sent to us by people all over the world, mostly Canadians. And we keep them on file, and we consider them if there's ever to be another season of SKS, which there may be, and we hope to be. And when we look at cases, even before SKS started, there's lots of cases, obviously. We look for a few pillars. We look for family members who are willing to participate, because it's important to be involved with family members when you're investigating, I believe. I think the process that family goes through in looking at these cases can be a cathartic experience for them, going through the process of looking back at all these details that they never thought they would ever get a chance to do. And I think that even if there isn't justice and truth found in a courtroom, and the gavel doesn't fall, and someone goes to jail, whatever, that the family member will at least get some kind of release out of the process. So that's important to me, to know that that's going to happen, because in every experience I've had with cases, and I've worked on 10 or 11 of them in my life, what that means, 10 or 11 different families, all of them have come back with transformative, discussions about sort of transformative experiences they've had, to lesser, and to some to a large extent, that have changed their lives. So that's first thing. We need family members to participate. Second thing, we would like to have police and investigative files. We'd like to have police that are willing to talk about their experiences with a case, retired or otherwise, active police, willing to give us some information to go on, to verify some things if we find information, and to act on information if we find new information. And we need a case that's got a viability factor to it. Are there people involved in a case that have already been pointed at? Circumstantial evidence? Is there evidence that's been verified or unverified? Are there people that the family always thought that they should talk to, or that knew something but never ever were talked to? And you weigh all these things together. Also, the location's interesting and important too, as an atmospheric element, as a storytelling element, but probably to a lesser extent than the other 3 pillars.
And I'm curious how you think about this balance between presenting, a compelling, entertaining mystery for kind of mass consumption, what we'd say maybe is the commercial side of the project. How do you balance that with your artistic intentions? Because clearly you are an artist, and anyone who's listened to an episode knows some of the soliloquies or dialogue you put in, combined with the field recordings and the music. It's definitely a work of art. combine that with the obvious, as you mentioned, the suffering of these people involved. As kind of the crafter or creator of this, how do you weigh, those, in some ways, competing demands?
Well, the best answer is SKS. I mean, the best answer to the question is listen to the podcast. That's how I balance it. That's how I've chosen to find that balance. But you're right. It is the idea that somebody's death can be consumed by a mass audience in the way that it is not a palatable thing when you actually think about it at the face of it. It's macabre. It's, there's devastating real lives that are affected by these stories, like Odette Fisher, for example, and the McNaughton family in SKS Season 1, and all the people that are surrounding the cases, like police that go into situations and crime scenes and, searching for bodies and things like that. Those are all events that are shocking and horrifying to people and humans in general, I think, retain those memories forever. So then how to approach that without sensationalizing or making it, sort of interrupting with a Burger King advertisement or something. It's at the core of what I don't want to do is kind of spin it into some kind of profit-making enterprise. I mean, that's not what I exist for on the planet. So my best answer is SKS, just listen to the series, and that's how I've chosen to deal with it.
Where do you start once you decide, okay, this is the case, I'm going to investigate, I'm going to spend this amount of time on? Could you give us a little kind of behind the scenes of your methodology as to, what are the early things you're going to look for, and maybe what happens, when you hit a dead end?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to talk about the background of what happens in the sort of office of SKS, which is generally my basement, where I do most of my voiceover from. I'm not sure if it sounds like it's coming from my basement, but I do work at CBC often, and I have some colleagues who work with me. Cecil Fernandez is the mixer. He was here helping me set up, and I have Steph Camp is a producer. She's one of the investigators that works with me, and Chris Oak is another producer that works with me on multimedia and scripting. And so what happens is I go out and record everything myself. I'm the only one in the room. I go to the door myself. I do everything myself. I have a camera and I have my recorder. The camera is sort of in the background. I walk up. These are for cold calls where I don't call the person. And I find that often when you do an approach of somebody who you don't know is going to talk to you or not, it's best to go in person. These days you get so many, you've just won a brand new cruise kind of calls that it's really difficult to get through the kind of thick skin that people have when they pick up the phone. So, and also it's often difficult to find people at home. So you have to sometimes see them at work and things like that, which is very awkward. But I go out and gather the material myself, and it's often reams, hours, wheelbarrows of time that I'm bringing back on in digital form. So all of these interviews and moments, it's not just interviews, it's me recording water. It's me recording snow crunching. It's me recording the dogs walking around behind me. It's the door opening, it's the bells, I have to record all of that. It's not just happening in the course of action. It's often, I have to, think about recording that stuff. So I bring all these reams of material back, and then we pour through it. And a lot of it is transcribed word for word. So we have a transcription team, army, that goes through almost everything I bring back. And then once everything is transcribed, we start scripting. And I say we, I mean I. Begin the scripting process, and I chunk together the scripts using what I think are the clips that tell the story the best and arc over the season. We arc out what episodes will have what in them based on what we have in-house. So then we have the sort of rough outlines of some scripts, but then I'm still recording. So I bring in new material, and then we shift things around. So it's like a 3D chessboard, and each script is kind of being played with this big board where different pieces move in different places, so that the script is never really finalized until like about the week before broadcast. And in some cases, I'm working on the interviews the week before, and then it broadcasts, so that it's effectively real time-ish. Wow. By the time we get to the end of the season. I'll have preloaded, say, 4 or 5 episodes, or 3 or 4 episodes before we even go out the post. So I'll have 3 or 4 episodes completely done. Say 3 maybe, before we start. and then I'll be finishing up all the rest as we go, and waiting until I get more material to even start some scripts. So by the time SKS was getting to episode 5, 6, 7, it's a scramble, right? And we know that it's released in a way that, because if you release if you finish the series, then there's no room for people coming to you with information. So and also we don't want people thinking that we know the answers, because we don't. We still don't know with season 2 or season 1. We're still working on the seasons, right? So it's a sort of forever mystery until it's solved. And I think that it's more engaging for an audience to see the process that way. And it does turn into kind of a nightmare for, everyone involved, particularly me, and sleepless nights and 24/7 days, 24/7 weeks that never kind of end. But that's the only way we can do it, really. And so it is a huge task. Every script is gone over and over and over and over, like hundreds of times. It's not something that's written off the back of a napkin. On the other hand, in the field, you'll also hear in SKS me talking to myself and saying, I'm just going into this guy's house, and it's a really kind of dirty blonde day, and it's snowy, and there's like -20. We use that. Like, I kind of script as I go, and sometimes we use my field versions of the script to help me, get through moments that would have to otherwise be scripted back at the shop, kind of thing. So it's quite a lengthy process, and then we have to go through lawyering. And we also have to go through the sort of ethical filters that CBC has in place, which I think are awesome.
Well, it is very interesting because, when you hear your field recordings of you driving around in the car, it does sound, and I think it doesn't sound overproduced. It sounds like this is you, wrestling with whatever the current issue is or the situation is. Yeah, it sounds very well done, but at the same time still has an immediacy.
Yeah, I mean, we work hard to get that sound. It's not a... I mean, to some extent, it's natural. It happened. A lot of it is happening as it seems, but we don't want to overproduce. And there's this huge tendency, I think, in some podcasts to go nuts on unnatural sound, and we're trying hard to kind of keep it that documentary feel.
You mentioned how important face-to-face interviews are, and you mentioned that in season 2 as well. And during season 2, there were 2 kind of heart-stopping, heart-thumping moments for me, where my adrenaline started pumping, as kind of you're our surrogate in this situation. The first was when you drove out west to interview the partner of the main suspect, Michael Lavoie, in season 2. And ironically, I happened to be shopping for groceries when we hear the clip of you go into her place of work, which is a grocery store. And that was a very subtle, but I thought extremely profound moment where, you ask her about the case. They're casually trying to set up a time to speak with her later, a more appropriate time. But you hear immediately in her voice, and, as you described during the show, you almost thought she was having a heart attack in front of you. And then hearing your voice kind of apologizing quickly, without us having any visuals, I think we completely understood what the case, the situation was. And the other moment that really stood out to me, I believe it was the brother of a former husband of Cheryl Shepard, where you were often it sounded like a very isolated area, and there was a huge dog clearly nearby. And I think all of us who are listening felt maybe a little worried about your safety. Or, of course, the very exciting moment, which we won't give away, is when you actually come face to face with Michael Lavoie. How do you decide when to go for it? Because it does feel a little unsafe, isn't maybe not the right word, but certainly the adrenaline is going for us listening. Can only imagine how you're feeling in those situations.
It's extremely important to be patient in any case, and patient with timing of events, timing of how to talk to somebody, because the people you go to talk to are also, their hearts are pumping. And, my job is to be as fair as possible to people, to approach people with as open a mind and heart, I guess, as I can. And that way, I believe the interview, that you get a superior interview. I was always taught to, or at least I had a certain mentor who always taught me to love my subjects. You have to love your subject. And to some extent, I think I've taken that to heart, because that way everybody gets the same treatment, and it's not based on aggression. It's easy to be aggressive. It's easy to take those kinds of tacts, and but you have to remember as a person who's stepping into someone else's life that you're a stranger. They don't know who you are. They don't know why you're asking these questions. And it's very easy for people, particularly Canadians, to say, F off, basically. I have the right to not have you talk to me. So why exacerbate that? I mean, if the process is, let's get information, we need to approach it with that in mind. I mean, that's the priority number one. Nobody wants to just shut things down. It's not about my ego and showing how brave I am or something like that. It's my job. It's my job to go into these situations. And yeah, it's a bit heart pounding for me, but that's what I have to do it. It's like, I got to do this. And once I tell myself that, I do it. So you go knock on the door when the time is right. Sometimes I wait around for days and weeks. Sometimes I try to see somebody a few times and it doesn't work out. I'll drive and look at their house. I'll drive past. Something doesn't feel right. I'll drive all the way back to Toronto. I won't do it. So there's, I've staked out and contacted and worked on trying to get interviews with people for a long time in my life, and SKS is no exception.
SKS is about solving a mystery, but it's also undoubtedly about the people caught in the wake of these tragedies. We get this fleeting glimpse of how the events have affected loved ones left behind, the detectives and investigators who've worked years and are somewhat haunted by these cases, and just a variety of different people in different life situations. And thinking in particular of the mothers of the missing in the past two seasons, they play such a pivotal role and are extremely sympathetic characters. I wonder, how do you balance trying to be an investigator, trying to be objective, with you must feel emotionally involved with these people in the case at some point? How do you work that out inside yourself?
Well, it's looking at the facts of the case, right? I mean, yes, they're passionate, and that's important, and it drives forward investigative techniques. And sometimes family members can introduce me to people that I would not have been able to meet otherwise. But I don't print or I don't publish everything a family member tells me because some of it simply isn't true. And some of it is driven by passion in a way that I think skews cases. So I have to be very careful. You're right, and it's very difficult not to become involved in a very, very personal level with the cases. And I don't have a problem with that. I have the intellect and ability to, and I think everybody does, to separate fact from fiction. And like if you love your subjects, or if you give everybody that kind of treatment, then everybody gets fairly treated in that way, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. People are crying on your shoulder. People are telling you things that are very painful for them, and you begin to take on their pain. And I guess that's my job. So I expect it.
With cold cases or just unsolved mysteries in general, I know a lot of people are very interested in using psychics. How do you feel about using psychics during the course of an investigation?
I'm not a believer in paranormal activity or psychics or any of that kind of detail. I do believe, however, maybe surprisingly, that a psychic, what they can offer to a case is just another creative angle. It basically helps to clear the palette, whether it's even though I know, or that it's scientifically impossible, that it helps you to redirect your vision slightly. And I think that anything that can take blinders off in a case is important. So, but I would never follow the words of a psychic or subscribe to some paranormal connection to disappearances or murders or things like that.
Yeah, I think we have the same philosophy. I mean, the evidence is the evidence, and you have to follow where that goes. Very much appreciate your time. One final question is, an issue we've been debating and sharing a bit is the question of the future of the Kingston Penitentiary. And I know you spent some time in the jails around Kingston. I'm not sure if the pen was one, but if you have any thoughts on the situation as Kingston's looking to redevelop it. The question is, should the site remain intact, or how much of it should remain intact as a historic site, as a tourism site, as an educational site, and how much of it can be offset to put up, condos, restaurants, those types of things. Do you have any experience in the Kingston Pen, or any thoughts on what should be done with this future?
Yeah, I've worked in the Kingston Pen. I worked in Kingston Penitentiary for about 9 months in the school there, off and on. I wasn't there the full time. And I've worked in a lot of the other pens in the Kingston area. It's architecturally interesting. It wasn't constructed by the inmates. In fact, I have a relative who helped to construct it because he was one of the first inmates there. That's another story, though. And I think that historic value is interesting. I also believe that I've been involved in urban exploration, which are people that go into abandoned places and take pictures. And I'm also a fan of just how history rolls over places. And I think the story of the place is part of the time that it spends in our space, if that makes sense. So if the place is falling apart, that's part of the story. If people are spray painting it or whatever, that's part of the story. If some of it turns into a condo, that's part of the story. Saying that, I think that there should be some element of preservation there. So obviously I would hate to see a huge historic edifice ripped down and just kind of a parking lot put up or something. But I think there's probably some value, to answer your question, in saving part of the pen for tourism and for reflecting on the horrors of the Canadian penal system and the people that have to experience it, from inmates to people that have to work there. And I think that it serves as a great monument to some of the negative that can go on in the Canadian penal system and how we treat each other.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you making the time for us, David. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I guess third season is still up in the air, so we'll just let people know to keep an eye and an ear out for it.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much. Yeah, I can't mention anything about season 3 right now, but I do hope everybody keeps listening because I'm not done.
I'll keep listening. I really appreciate it, David. Take care.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
A huge thank you to David Ridgen and all the fine folks at the CBC for helping make this interview possible. Episodes of Someone Knows Something can be found on the CBC's website at cbc.ca/SKS. Episodes are also available on iTunes and a variety of other podcast platforms. If you'd like to help support this show, Haunted Talks, a couple of very easy ways you can do that. The first is to subscribe to the show on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on, so you know when the new episodes are coming out. And also is to leave 5-star reviews as well. They really do make a big difference in helping get word about the show out. Tour information can always be found on our website, hauntedwalk.com, and you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Haunted Walk. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.